So in this video, I want to go through one of my first multifamily buildings that I purchased. So this project was an interesting project. It was several years ago when I first really entered into the multifamily space, the bigger multifamily space. I've told this story before that I had a pretty decent sized portfolio of smaller buildings, anywhere from 1, 2, 3, 4 units. And I kind of grew a portfolio of about 20 of those properties. I sold half of that portfolio because when I hired a third party property management company, the numbers no longer made sense financially. It hardly cash flowed. So my only solution was to swap to a bigger asset that actually cash flowed more. This was one of the first assets, and it turned out to be an amazing investment. So I want to go through those numbers with you today. So this is the building that I bought. It was located in North Bay, Ontario, a couple hours away from Toronto. And at the time, it was definitely a city that wasn't really on anybody's radar. I personally liked it because the numbers made sense. I didn't like the fact how far it was from where I was, but I thought to myself, I see some of these bigger investors have properties in different cities, and some of these investors even had properties in different countries. So it helped motivate me that if you had proper systems in place, it is definitely doable to have properties not within your city. So I found this property. It was located in a very safe and good area of that city. The numbers made a lot of sense. Again, it was a distressed building in a great area. The purchase price was around 1.7 million. So as you can see, the city looks very nice. It's also along the water. I took some time to research the city, research the area, and I found that overall the numbers worked well. And later on, a couple years later, it turned out to be an amazing investment because more people moved there because of the affordability, and obviously it worked out really well financially. I'm going to break down the numbers in terms of like what I bought it for, how much it was making, and then when I really made that return on investment. So getting into the numbers, I purchased this building for around 1.7 million. And at the time, that's a pretty good price. If you think about per unit, that's around $70,000 to $73,000 compared to what properties are going for now. So at the time, I thought it was a great deal compared to how much the properties were going for within my city or even around Toronto or surrounding areas of Toronto. So that's why I thought it was a great opportunity. And then one of the reasons why I also chose this property, because I noticed that it was on the market for a while. So the seller definitely wanted to get rid of it, but she was having a hard time, obviously because of the condition and some of the tenant quality. I could tell she just kind of gave up on the property. There was a lot of deferred maintenance. And to be honest, at the time, I didn't really plan to, take on all that work, but I thought to myself, obviously the numbers made sense compared to the other properties I was looking at. And then I also knew in the back of my mind is, well, if I can take some time to improve the property, it would be worth more. So I moved forward. It took a little bit of back and forth in terms of negotiation. We did settle upon 1.7 million, around there. And then in terms of the first mortgage, it was around 1.4. I believe the mortgage was actually about 1,395,000, about 82% loan to value. And for those that don't really understand loan to value, it's based on if the property is valued around 1.7 million, the lender will lend you 80% or 82% in this scenario of the value. So for those that don't quite understand what loan to value means, it is, for example, if you are looking to get a mortgage on a property that's valued at $1 million, 80% loan to value means you can get a mortgage up to 80% of the property, which would be $800,000 in this case. So in my case, I got an 82% loan to value, which is about $1,395,000 of $1.7 million in terms of the value. So I did get creative on this deal. I negotiated with the seller to have a second mortgage of around 10% of the purchase price. In second position, she agreed. We agreed around 4% interest only payments. I believe that was for a year, potentially a year and a half. And why I did this, just so I didn't have to put down as much money. Usually in deals like this, the lending rules have changed a bit in this environment, but back then it's pretty common to put down 20 to about 25% down for the mortgage. So in this case, I would have had to come up with about 18%, which is around $306,000. I didn't really want to put all that money in because I wanted some money in reserves just for the renovations. So what I did was that's why I had the seller, I negotiated with the seller to put down a second mortgage of 10%, which obviously brought down my money that I needed to put in the deal. And they came in at another 10%. So now I only had to put down 8% of the value. So how that looks is putting down 8% of the value is about, I had to come up with about $136,000 of equity on closing, plus obviously closing costs. And like I said, I had another $100,000 on the side for renovations. So in terms of closing, how that would look is the lawyer expense was about $13,000. This was very expensive. Most of my deals, I literally closed a building a few months ago and the lawyer cost was around this amount. That was for 45 unit apartment building. So this is a little bit expensive. And one of the reasons why it was expensive, because it actually, during the due diligence process and all the back and forth with the seller, it did go on for a long time. But I would say on average, your lawyer cost should be around $3,000 to $5,000. And then also sometimes you should work in the lender's lawyer cost as well, because most likely you're going to be paying that. So the appraisal, we had to also get an appraisal for this building. The appraisal cost was about $2,825,000. There was a phase one that was needed. A phase one is basically an environmental assessment of the property. Lenders like this just to make sure there's no environmental issues. The soil is not contaminated. There was never a gas station around the property back in the day. So this was about $2,500. And then the broker fee. So if you hire a mortgage broker, you're most likely going to be paying a broker fee. Usually I pay around 1% for a broker fee. So 1% of the mortgage they are able to secure for you. So in this case, the mortgage was around 1.4 million. So with that was about $14,000. And then also land transfer taxes, which is one of the reasons I don't really invest too much in Ontario now. The other reasons is also because of the laws around tenants and landlords. But yes, Ontario has land transfer taxes, which is pretty expensive. For this purchase, it came up to about $30,000. So to give you an example, Edmonton, that would be around $1,700. And then even Saskatchewan would be probably, you're looking at $4,000 or $4,500. So to pay $30,000 for land transfer taxes, that's very expensive. And the total came up to about $62,325 for the closing expenses. That's on top of my equity for the down payment, which would be $136,000. So for a total closing plus equity, I had to come up with just under $200,000, which was $198,325 to close on this property. And again, as I mentioned, I had another $100,000 on the side for renovations. My plan was just to renovate each unit when they come due. This was one of my new projects. I never closed on a property this size before, so I wasn't trying to have a building half vacant and go through that process like some of the projects I do now. So I wanted to take things one step at a time, and it did work out. It did work out very well. I did hire a property management company, and they seem to, take care of everything really well. One of the biggest pros to buying a building that I noticed compared to when I had a bunch of these smaller properties, it's one, the cash flow was a lot more. And because the property supports management, it's less work. So I'm going to go through the income and expenses when I purchased the property. What I've learned from this purchase is there's two types of income and expenses. One, the seller gives you their version, and then the actual version. This is very important because the actual version sometimes will be very off compared to what the seller gives you. So you don't really want to rely on the seller's information. And during the due diligence period, you want to go through all the documents, go through all the income and expenses to make sure all the information that the seller gave you is actually valid. So the seller's information that they gave me was the income was around $252,600. The expenses came in around $88,400. So the total net operating income was $164,200. And for those that don't understand net operating income, this is the total amount when you have your gross income, basically all rents, all of the income that is coming from the property minus your gross expenses. Gross expenses from in terms of maintenance, utilities, everything to operate the property. Right? Not including your mortgage, which will give you the net operating income. So that's what the seller's version was. After I did all the due diligence and everything, the actual version was the gross income was around $240,000, about $20,000 per month. Expenses were around $100,900, right? So there was a pretty big difference here. So in terms of the expenses, the property tax was about $42,000. Utilities came in around $40,500. Insurance came in around $4,000. And property management, which is one of those things that they did include in the seller's version. On average, it's going to be around 5%. So 5% of $240,000 would be around $12,000. And in this property, because it's a little bit bigger, hallways need to be clean, driveways need to be shoveled. You're going to need either a superintendent or a caretaker. They're technically the same thing. It's just somebody at the property that kind of is on call for emergencies or to, assign duties or tasks to. So for this property, we have a caretaker, and for that cost, it would have been $22,400. So for the total cost again, which was $100,900. So the net operating income, reviewing the actual numbers, came in around $139,100, which is about $11,592 per month. Still not bad, but it is a pretty big difference compared to what the seller gave me, with a net operating income at $164,200, right? So that's more than $20,000 off, right? So this is why it's very important to actually go through the numbers and make sure what you're buying. So when it comes to the mortgage, right? So we got a decent mortgage. Our mortgage for around $1.4 million. The mortgage payments were around $70,000. The exact number, I believe it was around $69,248 per year, which is about $5,770 per month. Remember, we have a second mortgage at 4% interest only payments, and those payments came in around $566 per month, or $6,792 per year. So before we get to the cash flow, how do you calculate? So if we minus the mortgage payments from the net operating income, our cash flow comes in at around $62,059. And per month, that would look like $5,255 per month. So that's not too bad. And why I like this is just because before I bought this building, I was in a situation where I wasn't really cash flowing anymore. And since I wasn't cash flowing anymore, I decided to sell. So going from not cash flowing to now cash flowing about $5,000, right? Selling and cash flowing $5,000 was something that kind of, I knew I'd made the right decision. So if you wanted to kind of go a step further and to understand how to calculate cash on cash return, you would calculate $63,059, basically the cash flow divided by the cash in the deal. So remember, my cash in the deal came in around $198,325. So when you divide that, you'll get a 30% cash on cash return. So what that means is this is based on how long it'll take you to recoup your money that you have in the property, how many years. So in this case, it would just take over 3 years to recoup my money. And actually, it's not really a bad investment. But what I learned is a year later, the property right beside me, 22 unit building, appraised for, I think it was just over like $3.4 million. So when I saw that, it got me excited, and I thought to myself, why don't I revalue my property to see where it comes in at? And obviously it came in just over $3 million. And I refinanced and was able to pull out just over $1 million. Well, in terms of the new mortgage, but after all the expenses, right? Obviously paying out the second, and my money in the deal, I was left with about $800,000 in tax-free money, which obviously I used almost all of that to buy another property, to buy more property. So that's one of the reasons why I do love real estate. And I'm very happy that I did make that tough decision to sell half the portfolio and go bigger. I can promise you, going into this deal was very daunting at first, but once it closed, I realized it wasn't that difficult. You had other people, for example, management there to help, run the building properly. So overall, it was a good experience. You can obviously get yourself into trouble if you don't do the proper due diligence and you buy a property that's obviously overpriced and the market changes. But I believe if you don't go into real estate and looking just to speculate and trying to bank on appreciation and doing the proper numbers and making sure the property cash flows, you will most likely do well, especially if you buy in locations that are good locations and maybe the property just needs some work. You should really not have any issues with the asset. So if you enjoyed that video, please like, share, and subscribe, and I'll make similar videos in the future.